Today we'll be reviewing the startup and installation of a ES60 RFCA drinking water chiller. Typically this unit would be hooked up to a building's drinking water system serving multiple outlets via a recirculating loop. Typical outlets would be drinking fountains, bottle filling stations, glass fillers on a sink, ice makers, anywhere that potable water is required. When the unit's uncrated, plumbed, wired, and ready for startup, you want to take a walk around and make sure that there's enough clearance and ventilation requirements for the unit to operate. The requirements for this particular ES60 are 24 inches on the left side here with your control panel and electrical box, 36 inches on the front of the unit to allow access to both the Purifier cabinet and the refrigeration cabinet. An additional 36 inches on the right side of the unit, again for access to your purifiers and filters and sterilizer, and then 12 inches on the rear of the unit to allow proper ventilation. The ambient air temperature should not exceed 95 degrees Fahrenheit on a standard unit unless the high ambient option is included. And that would be designated with a -HA at the end of the model number. On the rear side of the unit, you want to make sure there's 12 inches. This is the air intake side going to the condenser. You want to be sure that there's no HVAC equipment or other heat generating equipment on this side that's going to be exhausting air into the unit. Another important thing to keep in mind is the location of the electrical shutoff. You want to make sure that it's relatively close to the chiller so that you can make sure the unit is completely locked out if you have to work on any of the electrical components. Some tools you're going to need for the startup: an amp probe, a digital voltmeter, flashlight, both Phillips and flat screwdriver, an adjustable wrench, a service valve wrench, a pair of wire cutters for the manual and tags inside and outside of the unit, a 7/16 nut driver for the outside panels, and also a 7/16 ratchet wrench for the pump plug. For this, it's just held in, friction fit, and wiggle it out of place. Inside, you'll have your electrical box, which is held closed with a 1/4 turn screw. Next, you're going to want to remove the front and side panels. To do that, we secure them with a 7/16 bolt for shipping to make sure they don't vibrate loose. You're going to want to remove them. There are 2 on this front panel and 1 on the side panel. Once you have the front and side panels off the unit, you'll have access to both your filter, purifier, sterilizer compartment and your refrigeration compartments. Right in here is where you'll find your manual. You can simply use your wire cutters to clip it out. Inside your manual, you'll have your pertinent chiller information, the location of the chiller, its model number, obviously the serial number. Serial number is important to keep track of in case you ever need to call the factory for warranty information or for parts. We have a record of each chiller. Inside, you'll have a unit tag, a copy of your unit tag, which will give your amperages, your voltage, and some of the other technical information on the unit. Followed up by the more detailed information on the components of the chiller. Section 2 has your install and startup sort of documentation, which we'd be going through if you were starting up the chiller, filling the chiller. It also gives the plumbing and electrical schematics and diagrams for your reference or for the reference of anyone servicing the chiller. It'll also give our contact information and your spare parts order form. So if you ever need anything for the unit or anybody maintaining the unit needs any spare parts, they'll have a list of them with our Filtrine BOM number. Additionally, your manual will have your scheduled maintenance documents and how to perform maintenance on the unit. Each chiller is going to ship with a year's worth of consumables for your annual maintenance. It should be in a box somewhere inside the chiller cabinet. When you remove the panels, you'll be able to see it. Inside this box, you'll have a year's worth of elements. So we recommend changing the elements out 3 times a year. Each housing will have various information on it. It'll give you the housing type, the element number for reordering, and also it's a good idea to match the element, the sticker on the spare element with the housing itself to make sure you get them in the right spot. It'll also give you our information for reorder, and it'll give you a description of changing a filter, basically what we're doing right now. So to change a filter element, obviously there are 2 ball valves on either side, which you're going to want to close. And then there's a red button at the top that's a pressure release. You're going to want to press that, make sure that there isn't any pressure in the system. We also supply each unit with a filter wrench that locks onto the bottom. And you can break that free. And then you can remove the bottom of the housing. You will have a little bit of water in it, but it'll be displaced by the filter element, the old filter element. So you'll take off the old element, unpack a new one, and slide it onto the standpipe. Make sure that it gets all the way on and is covering all of the holes on the standpipe. After you put the new element on, you can replace the bottom of the housing, and really these just need to be hand tight. So to install the UV bulb into the UV sterilizer, you're going to want to be sure to first remove this protective guard here. You may have to take a nut driver and loosen up slightly the bolts here, but not all the way. And then your components, you'll have a quart sleeve, which you'll find in a cardboard box in your annual maintenance kit. This UV ring, and the trick to this is to just put the O-ring on the very lip of the quart sleeve, and then using the cap here, sort of roll it down into place, and that'll create a nice seal, keeping the water out of the quart sleeve. This you can put into the sterilizer housing. You want to be very careful. The quart sleeve is actually very brittle, and you don't want to break it inside of the housing. Screwing that on, again, hand tight, just creating a good seal there is sufficient. You don't need to wrench on it. Take the UV bulb and place it down into the quart sleeve. It should go in pretty easily. And just leave it in there snug. Hook up your 4-pin electrical connection, and the UV sterilizer should be good to go. Again, there are ball valves on both the inlet and outlet of the sterilizer housing to isolate it for service. The sterilizer has been assembled, the filters and purifier cartridges are in. Next, we'd want to put the pump plug in the pump so we can begin filling the unit. Pump plug's right in here in the electrical box. You're going to want to remove it. Using a ratchet wrench, you'll put the pump plug into the unit. You want to make sure you do that so that when you fill it, water doesn't come pouring out of the pump. If this was installed in the field, you'd have hard insulated piping on the water in and a ball valve here. We recommend that they're installed with a shut-off valve right outside the unit, so you can fill it and you can isolate it if need be for service. So to fill the unit, you have your air release right here and your water in. So you turn it on, bleed the air, and allow the tank to fill from the bottom up. Once you get a steady stream out of the air release, you know that it's most of the air is out of the system. You can either put a big large hose over that or just let it spill into a bucket when you're filling. You want to make sure that you get as much air out of the system as possible before starting it up, so you don't have air in the lines and around the pump. On these, you also are going to have to bleed air out of the actual loop serving the fountains. Sometimes the best way to do that is through the bubblers themselves once you get the pump going, and you can bleed out the air that way. So next we're going to check the voltage on the unit, make sure that that's correct. Once you turn it on, obviously we have our whip right here in the field. If this was in its final location, you'd have it hardwired through one of these knockouts, through this knockout. But to test the voltage, you obviously want to, this is a 480 volt system, so you want to make sure you test each leg against each other, make sure they're all connected properly and showing 480 volts on your voltmeter, which they are, so we should be good. Make sure it matches the tag on the inside of the unit indicating that, that 480 voltage. So now that we have the unit filled, we're ready to start and run the pump. Obviously we haven't put the fuses in for the refrigeration system yet, as we haven't started that portion of the unit. But to start the pump, you want to flip this breaker on in the electrical box, the one designated for the pump, and then we can turn the 3-position switch to the manual side and get that running. What we want to do is actually check the rotation of the pump, make sure that on this unit, this 3-phase unit, that the legs aren't reversed. So what we can do is, if you have an assistant, they can look at the rotation, or if you're pretty skilled, you can look at it and we'll pump it on. And this one is reversed, so we're going to have to switch the legs on it. So because the pump rotation didn't match the sticker on the pump for the right direction, we're going to have to reverse 2 of the legs on this pump. First of all, obviously make sure you shut off your main power disconnect on the wall or at your location, and then we're going to switch 2 of these legs around. These 3 legs are the ones for the pump, so if we switch 2 that are next to each other, it should reverse the rotation. So once we're done there, we've switched these 2 leads for the pump. We can test it and make sure that the rotation is good. We'll put on our main power. Just bump it, test the rotation. And it was corrected, so it's rotating the correct way for the arrow on the pump. So now we're ready to move on and really get the air out of the system and run the pump for a while. So after the unit's running, you can turn on the sterilizer, and you're going to want to make sure that the light goes off. In this case, it did not, so that would indicate that the sterilizer board needs to be calibrated. So the sterilizer board is right in the electrical box. You shouldn't have to adjust it. We adjust it in the factory. However, if you need to, its location is right here, the adjustment screw. And this will adjust the sensitivity of the sensor, the UV sensor. So you can turn that clockwise until the light turns off. You want to make sure that you really don't over rotate it. You know, to really adjust the sensitivity, you want it to be right on that borderline just so the light turns off. So your alarm light turns off. Next, we're going to want to adjust the, make sure that the set points are correct. We use the digital control on the outside of the electrical box. The first setting here shows the water temperature, the current water temperature. To change the set point, once you hit set, that's going to be your thermostat set point, which we have for 45 degrees. While it's blinking, you can adjust it up or down, however you want. But we'll keep it at 45. And then once you hit set again, that's going to give you your low temp cutout. Again, you can adjust that up or down. And once you hit set, it'll bring you back to the current water temperature. And this is how you're going to control your set points for the unit. Now we're going to go ahead and start to open up the refrigeration system. On this unit, there are 3 valves, one on the top of the receiver. All the refrigerant is pumped down into the receiver for shipment, and then on the high and the low side of the compressor. So for a valve with a packing like this one, you know, this valve doesn't have a packing obviously, but the valve on the top of the receiver does, and this one does. You want to be sure to loosen that packing slightly before adjusting the valve, opening the valve. So once it's adjusted, you can make sure you can open it up. And we'll backseat all these valves, since we don't have any gauges or anything on it right now. And then you want to make sure that that packing is nice and tight again. And again, anytime you adjust the valve, you want to make sure you loosen the packing. So once we're done opening all 3 valves, backseating every valve, we're going to head back to the electrical box to put the refrigeration fuse in the trap. So now that we've opened up all of our service valves, we'll take out one of the 2 fuses that we supply for the refrigeration system. We'll put it into the trap, into the front of the trap there. Close it. And now your refrigeration system's ready to run. So now that we've, you know, we ran the pump for a little while, we shut the power down, we put the refrigeration fuse in the trap, we can turn the power back on and we're ready to run the refrigeration system. So again, we turn the power back on and we can get it going. In order to get the system running and actually equalize the refrigerant in the system, since we released it out of the receiver, we are going to have to trip the manual trip on the dual pressure switch. This will activate the solenoid here and equalize the pressure so the refrigeration system will turn on. To do that, you remove the the face cover plate, and the manual trip is right on the left side. So you'll activate that. You may have to hold it for up to 10 seconds or so until it'll stay on its own and the pressure is equalized. And it should hold itself up. It's important at this point to highlight the bypass valve. Right here, when you receive the unit, it's going to be wide open. Obviously, when you plumb everything up and hook it up, you're going to want to close it to make sure water's circulating through the loop out to the fountains. But you can also sort of control the amps and you know, the pressure in your loop with this bypass valve. So right now we're going to go over to the electrical box. After this unit's been running for about 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to check our amps on all our different components. So now we're going to, inside the electrical box, we're going to check our amp amps on each of the components. You'll want to check the legs and compare it to the tag on the inside of the unit. This particular one has a range of 1.3, and we're below that range on that leg. So we'll compare it to the second leg. We're well below it on that leg. And on the highest one, we're about 1. We're still well below the acceptable range. If we were too high for some reason, we can adjust the bypass valve that we just showed and open it a little bit, and that'll relieve some of the pressure on the pump and drop the amperage. So at this point, the chiller's running. It's working, so what we're going to do is we're going to test the low temp cutout on the unit. To do that, we can simulate a low temp scenario by raising the set point on the low temp cutout to above where the current water temperature is. Like so. I think we have to bring it up to about 60. And it shuts off like it should. And also your low temp alarm will go on. So that worked as it should. And what we can do, we can drop that back down to 40. And your low temp cutout will go off. So that kind of completes, starting up the chiller. We've tested the low temp cutout, tested the alarms on the unit. So the next thing we'd have to do is just button up the system and put the panels back on. So once the unit's running as it should be, and we've checked all the amps on the different components and they're all within range, everything looks good, we're going to start buttoning up the unit. We'll just put the panels back on in the same order that we took them off. Replace the cover on the dual pressure switch, high-low pressure switch, excuse me. And then we'll make sure each valve is back seated and the packing is tight. And then we'll replace the covers on each valve. And then we'll put the final panel in place. By sliding it up, pushing it back. So once that's securely in, you want to be sure to replace your bolts down here at the bottom. So now that we've put the panels back on, that wraps up starting up this ES60 chiller. Thanks for watching.